Okay, so I'd actually like to introduce our speaker this evening, Dr. Ruth Podee. Dr. Podee is a graduate of the BU Department of Family Medicine. She received her, received her medical degree from Yale University School of Medicine. She right now is a family physician working in the Valley Medical Group. She is also practicing as a school physician and a medical director for a correctional facility in Western Mass. She is also oversees the largest medical department at a rural hospital, Bay State Franklin Medical Center in Greenfield. Dr. Podee has numerous honors and awards. Most recently, she was awarded the 2015 Franklin County Clinician of the Year by the Mass Medical Society. She's also received the Distinguished Woman of the Year Award in 2015 by the Greenfield Recorder. She's board certified in family medicine and is a diplomat of the American Board of Addiction Medicine. She is well published in the journal, the Medical Journal, not sure which one this one is, JAMA, and the American Medicine. She has presented on numerous topics relative to opioid addiction, the opioid crisis in America, controlled substances, chronic pain, and protecting patients and community, the scope of pain, and physiology of addiction. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Ruth Podee.
Carolyn, she's been really great at organizing. So I tend to move around a lot, so I may pick up the mic and walk. I'm really glad there's students here. It's lovely. And I know that I have like post-athletic lacrosse students here. Somebody just leave practice? Yeah, good for you guys. I don't know if the post-practice cookie is the best idea, but whatever. Just drink a lot of fluid. So I'm really glad to be here. It's, you know, I love the Cape, and just crossing over the bridges and coming here made me feel like summer. It was lovely. So we're going to talk about addiction in general, and these slides will be available. She will get them for you, anybody who wants them. I don't make handouts because I think it's just wasteful. There's a YouTube video that's very similar to this, and if there are people at home who you think, wow, they should have heard that, send them the YouTube link. It's just Google my name with YouTube and it pops right up. And I'm happy to take questions absolutely throughout the entire talk. Sometimes it works better if it's at the end, but whatever you want. If there's a point, a slide you don't understand, or you want me to backtrack, stick your hand up. You know, this is a tiny group, so I'm happy to have it be very engaged. So this is a slide that is an article that came out in Science magazine in 1997. So I was in medical school then, meaning that I'm not that old. It was fairly recent news, the concept that addiction is a brain disease and it matters. And this concept that we have is a shift, I think, for many of us, and we're going to talk about what happens to the brain with addiction of all sorts. This isn't just an opiate talk, it's a talk about how it is that some of us get linked to the disease of addiction and some of us avoid it. So we're going to spend time thinking about three parts of the reward circuit of the brain: the ventral tegmental area, the nucleus accumbens, and the prefrontal cortex. So nobody in the room needs to remember any of that. Prefrontal cortex is the one part of the brain I think most people do know of, because it's that very last part of the brain that develops. It's that final area that gets cooked. And in fact, in this building, are there actual students who go to school in this building? Yeah, okay. So in this building and in the high school, nobody's prefrontal cortex is fully developed. That's part of the lovely nature of the adolescent brain. This part of the brain is the most fundamental, elemental part of the brain. It is the part of the brain that tells you to get up in the morning, find food, water, and survive. Although we all may think our job today was to go to school, go to lacrosse, go to drama club, go to work, our job is to actually survive long enough to send our genetic material forward. That is the purpose of every being on the planet. We just don't think of it that way. But that is what drives us, evolutionarily speaking. And so this reward circuit of the brain allows you to perform those functions well. And your ancestors were good at this. We all exist today because your ancestors were awesome at activating the reward circuit. The problem is the disease of addiction actually breaks this part of the brain. And if we could pick up the disease of addiction and move it to your visual cortex, or the part of your brain that processes sound, then you would have some high frequency loss, or maybe you'd lose your peripheral vision, and it would be no big deal. It would be a disease we could all manage. And instead, the most fundamental part of the brain breaks down with addiction, which is one of the reasons it's such a hard disease to manage. So we're going to spend no time talking about serotonin. Serotonin is the neurotransmitter that governs mood and cognition. When it's a little low, we can have anxiety or depression. We're going to spend all of our time talking about the neurotransmitter dopamine. And dopamine is the transmitter that gives you this great sense of joy and euphoria and wow, that was awesome. I need to come back and keep doing that again. It has two behaviors associated with it, and that is compulsion and perseveration. And again, you needed to be compulsive about finding food and clean water. You needed to perseverate about finding a mate. It should have been the last thing you thought of before you went to bed, the first thing you thought of when you woke up in the morning. And again, your ancestors with those two behaviors, very helpful to you personally. Take those two behaviors and apply them to addiction, not such helpful behaviors. Yet they're two of the behaviors that define addiction. So some of us on this planet are just lucky. We have high dopamine levels. And I'm going to make an argument here that at a baseline in this room, our average dopamine level is 100. There's no real way to measure this. There's no blood test. There's no PET scan where we look at spikes in dopamine and are able to really quantify it. But to make the point I'm going to make, we're going to say that everybody in the room on average sits at a dopamine level of 100. And that some of us are sitting at 105 or 108. We are the glass half full, find a solution to every problem, feel happy and joy most every day kind of people. And part of it's genetics, some of it's epigenetics, and some of it's just good luck. You should be grateful if you're one of those people. Some of us look a lot more like this. And these are sort of the Eeyores of the world, right? They're sort of low-level dysthymic. Their dopamine levels sit at 85 or 86. For those of us in the medical field, a lot of these people fill our ERs in my office. I had like 8 in a row today of this, and I could see them coming. Like I know my patients really well, and I think, oh, I get a whole stack of ERs in a row. It's never great because I can't change behavior, really. It's a hard thing to shift. The point there is that there's a range of dopamine. On average, we're sitting maybe at 100. So the way it works is that when you are crawling out of your cave in March, right, 150 years ago or 1,000 years ago, and you have been living in this dark cave somewhere on the Cape, and you're coming out to look for food and water and maybe some fiber, like you haven't had fiber in several months, you're looking for a fresh June strawberry or a fiddlehead fern or a tiny slender spear of asparagus, something good, you get a little spike in dopamine when you find that because your brain's saying, awesome, I needed fiber, I needed some vitamins, thank you for finding that, come back to the same patch, same times next year, okay? So you get a spike in dopamine when that happens. Today we get spikes in dopamine because we eat flourless chocolate cake, right? So that's a good thing. Your dopamine may spike to 150. When you have sex, it's consensual, everything's going well, your dopamine spikes to 200. It is supposed to be that way because you want to return to that behavior in order to survive as a species. When you use a drug like cocaine, your dopamine will spike to 350. And when you use any of the potent opiates, whether it's in pill form or heroin, your dopamine will spike between 500 and 900. A drug like crystal meth will have you spike dopamine to 12 to 1300. So imagine flourless chocolate cake thinking that was fabulous, and I'm describing something that may be 8 times or 10 times higher than that. So the real question is like, why aren't we all doing crystal meth right now? Because that seems like a great idea, right? It seems like it's a good plan to have dopamine go that high. Okay, we're gonna spend time exploring why it doesn't work. So let's talk about 2 drugs and precisely how they work. So everything I said in terms of pleasure and returned behavior is based on dopamine. And all addiction, whether it's marijuana, whether it's video games, whether it's gambling, works in some very complicated way, but at the end of the day, it ends up spiking dopamine. Some of the pathways get really hard to explain. Like somebody asked me to explain the video game pathway, and I'm like, I have no idea. 20 years from now, somebody may be able to walk that one through. But at the end of the day, it has to do with spiking dopamine. 3 things that you can do to affect dopamine. Sitting in this room, we can't actually adjust it in our heads, but you get to increase the amount of dopamine produced. You get to increase the number of receptors on the other side of the synaptic cleft receiving the information from dopamine, and you get to influence the number of reuptake inhibitors, the little vacuums that are sucking dopamine out of the synaptic cleft. 3 things in an equation that control how much dopamine there is. So 2 fast drugs, because they're easy to explain. Cocaine works by turning off the vacuums. It shuts down the little reuptake, so the vacuums aren't there. When the vacuum isn't in there sucking dopamine out of the cleft, you get a dopamine of 350. The way that the opiates work, like heroin, is a little bit more complicated because they attach to the mu opiate receptor. They do a negative feedback loop through GABA, but at the end of the day, they just push more dopamine out. They make more dopamine. So those are pathways that are easy to understand, but again, every addictive behavior has some pathway that is influencing one of those three parts of the dopamine equation. So the problem is that we have been on this planet in this form for 200,000 years. And it takes a long time for us to evolve, right? Tens of millions of years for true evolution to happen. And to have a brain that sees a dopamine of 150 or 200, our ancestors saw those dopamine levels. That's normal. The brain responds to that and says, that's good, let's come back to that behavior. But when the brain starts to see dopamine levels of 500, 900, 1300, it says, holy smokes, there's something going on here that's wrong. Nobody should be having dopamine spikes like that. There's nothing in nature that should be giving me that kind of dopamine level. And it starts to downregulate. It starts to erase all the dopamine receptors. It gets rid of 80% of the receptors sitting on the other side. It stops producing natural dopamine. It says, you know what, this brain doesn't need more dopamine, I'm not going to make it anymore. And it produces many more vacuums, so it's sucking the dopamine out of the synaptic cleft. So the problem is you have a brain that no longer returns to its baseline. And maybe people who are struggling with addiction, maybe I would argue their dopamine levels at a baseline weren't 110. They may have been the ones sitting at 85. They will never go back to the days, those very early days when you start abusing a drug or alcohol or start with a behavior where you get these really high spikes. That first time you get to a crystal meth of 1300, you will never, ever get there again. But a lot of people chase it. They're looking for it all the time. And after a period of time, whether it's 3 months or 4 months, they never, ever get to a spike in dopamine at all. They're desperate to return to their normal. And every day's use is not just about trying to drive away the sickness they feel when they don't use. They are desperate to get to a baseline. I feel normal again. My dopamine is at 85 because their new baseline dopamine is sitting at 40 or 45. And it is hard to get out of bed. It is hard to get to the shower. It is hard to pour your kids a bowl of cereal when you are feeling that miserable every single day. So one of the reasons that we don't do crystal meth in this room is not because we could have explained how the brain breaks, but because this process that happens is not really consistent with long-term healthy living, right? Nobody in this room wants to have a dopamine level of 45. I don't even want a dopamine level of 45 for an hour. I certainly don't want to have it for months or years on end. So it leads to this concept of a broken brain. And I use this slide, which of course is just a cartoon picture of the slide, but it reminds me to say the words that things in our body that break can often heal. So we have this incredibly important elemental part of the brain that's been damaged, but that with time and with distance from the drug or the behavior, brains get better. So if we don't talk about it throughout the talk, at the very end, if somebody could just ask, what does it take for brains to rebuild their dopamine? Okay, because it happens. Okay, so let's talk about another disease. And there are people in this room who know this disease very well. So this is diabetes. So I don't have diabetes. I have a nice, normal, healthy pancreas. It makes insulin. Insulin attaches to an insulin receptor. When my insulin receptor is activated, it sucks glucose into the cell. The way that type 1 diabetes works is that your pancreas isn't making enough or any insulin. And so without any insulin, that nice hormone, there's nothing to attach to the insulin receptor, and consequently, a very critical component that's sitting in the bloodstream doesn't get sucked up into a cell. That's type 1 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes, normally in the beginning, your pancreas makes enough insulin, but the insulin receptor is broken. And consequently, you can't suck glucose into the cell. The reason I remind people of this is that I'm describing pathways that happen in other organs in the body, whether it's diabetes with the pancreas, but we can talk about a disruption in the messaging system when it comes to cardiovascular disease and the laying down of plaques. We can talk about it with kidney disease. In fact, very few diseases don't have something to do with the disruption in the messaging system, the messenger themselves, or the receptor, which is what I just described with addiction, right? It happens to happen in the brain, which I think is our most complicated organ in the body. But when people cop an attitude with me or with people I take care of, saying, look, you've got to just pull yourselves up by the bootstraps. You've got to get over this thing. Like, pull yourself together, get yourself some religion. You have bad parents, you grew up in a bad household. your disease was your choice, and I don't believe that it's a real disease. I think to myself, and I act and I say to people, what if I did that to my 3 diabetics I saw today? What if I said, hey you know what, I know you have type 1, maybe type 2 diabetes. I need you to get over that in 5 days. I'm giving you 5 days of rehab for your diabetes, right? I need you to become a vegan today. I need you to start running 30 to 50 miles a week, right? Can everybody in the room do that for me? Can everybody make that change instantly? What if I were the kind of doctor, and that's what I said to you, you have whatever disease you have, the way I know that we're gonna fix it is you adopt my stern, strict lifestyle. I could fix every type 2 diabetic out there. Right? It's just that no one would ever want to see me because I'd be the meanest doctor on earth, and I wouldn't be meeting patients where they are. Diabetes is a rotten disease to have. Type 1 diabetes, you can't sort of get over it on your own, but type 2 diabetes mainly has to do with the foods you eat and the level of activity you have in your life. There's some genetics as part of it, but a lot of it has to do with changing major things in your life to get better. And we do not have the expectation that people are going to do it fast. We do not have the expectation that people are going to just do it on their own without medical support. We never have that expectation. And I don't fire you when you do badly. You know how often my patients go off their diabetes meds? All the time. Their hypertension meds, they don't take them half the time. When I give people their asthma meds, 70% of the time they don't use them, right? They're all relapsing, every one of them, and I should just fire them from my practice. I would have about 12 people in my practice if I fired everybody who wasn't managing their disease well. So it's a real shift, I think, for both the medical profession, but also for every one of us to acknowledge that we treat this one very differently than we do from other diseases. And my argument is I don't think we should. Okay, so, I'm gonna grab my water, 1 second. So I said earlier there's no real way to measure the dopamine, but when you look at PET scans on brains, you can see what dopamine looks like. Dopamine in all the pictures I'm about to show you looks orange or hot looking. So there's a healthy brain on the left with dopamine. There's a brain of somebody with an addiction on the right, and there's not a lot of dopamine going on. When you go drug by drug, what you see in that middle column is those are all healthy brains. So you see plenty of dopamine running down that middle column, but those right column, that top one is cocaine, that next one down is crystal meth, the third one down is alcohol, and the final one down is heroin. So again, those are not brains that anybody would choose to have. If they knew how badly they would feel after a period of time, they would not choose that. I like this slide because it reminds me to tell you that alcohol has still quite a bit of dopamine in it. If you look at that picture, it's still pretty orange. It's one of the reasons why alcoholism, which I would argue quite strongly is actually the most concerning substance in our society. It causes the most harm, other than tobacco, to individuals, but also to society. We spend a huge amount of time talking about opiates, and I think that's very appropriate given where we are in 2016. But alcohol remains a major understated disease. Most of the people who are locked up for addiction are locked up for alcoholism. And for the people in the room that work in an ER or another setting, you see alcohol-related disease all the time. And that I'm not going to understate that, and we're going to spend time on alcohol. So there's 3 things that put you at risk for addiction. We're going to spend time on each one of these. The first is genetics. The second one is when you started your first exposure to an addictive substance. And the final one is a history of childhood trauma. So the genetics on addiction are really intense. 50% of people with addiction, it's genetic in origin, meaning that if one of your parents is addicted to a substance, whether it's alcohol or another substance, you have a 50% chance of developing that disease yourself. There are very few diseases that run that genetically strong, very few. Colonic adenomatous polyps have strong genetics, right? That's a kind of polyp that will lead potentially to colon cancer. But most cancers aren't particularly genetic. People always walk into my office and they're like, I got cancer everywhere. And I'm looking at them and thinking, you're a smoker. Everybody in your family smoked. You're sitting there with your bag of Cheez-Its and you're, whatever else. My point being that people, all of us actually, think we have strong genetic risk on a variety of diseases. There are a handful of diseases with strong genetics, but most diseases have to do with how we live on this planet here and now. Addiction is an exception to that. Some of the other psychiatric illnesses are also an exception to that. ADD has a very strong genetic predisposition, and I think anybody of us in the room with ADD will look around our families and be like, yep, I see a lot of it. So the reason I like to spend time on this one is to remind you that as parents, and I'm a parent too, You got to actually tell your kids about the diseases that really matter for them. And I tell you, your kids need to know about their genetic risk. It is the only fair thing that you can do, because they don't get to determine their genetics, right? They get to determine some of the other stuff that we're going to talk about, but their genetics got handed to them, and you need to tell them the truth about your family tree when it comes to addiction. So I certainly sat down with my 3 kids and I outlined where they're at risk and why it is a concern for me. And if you haven't done it, and I would argue you should start with when kids are in the 5th grade so they can understand the risk and what they could do to influence it.
How old?
How old? So 5th grade I think is very reasonable, and we're going to talk about why I say that number. It could be earlier than that, but I think 5th grade is what, an 11-year-old, 10-year-old? Because the next thing I'm going to show you is the second thing that predetermines who's going to develop an addiction is how early their brain was exposed. So we used to think brains were done developing at the age of 12, right? I mean, like, not that long ago. But it's very clear to us now that that final 10 years of brain development that happens between the ages of 12 and 24 or so is huge. Really critical things happen, and we're going to spend some time talking exactly what happens during that 10 to 12 years. But if you talk to somebody with an addiction and ask them, what did you start and when did you start it? I'm going to tell you what that sounds like. We know that every addiction out there starts while the brain is developing. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying that 5th graders are shooting heroin. I'm not saying that 8th graders are doing that. But everybody with the disease of addiction started some substance while their brain was under development. And I always do the 3 easy ones when I'm talking to somebody. I say, did you start with alcohol, marijuana, or nicotine? And how old were you? And the average age that you will hear is I was 12, 13, or 14. Those are the average ages of first use. Now, I don't think that would surprise anybody in the room. I don't know, does that surprise people in the room? Okay. When I have a room full of people who are incarcerated, when I have 150 men in a room who are locked up mainly for their disease of addiction, and I ask the question, 3 drugs, nicotine, marijuana, and alcohol, how old were you when you started? I start with 12, right? Every hand is in the air at 12, but then I start counting back. 11, 10, 9, 8, I have hands all over the place. 7, 6. At the age of 6, I still have hands in the air. And I feel physically ill at that stage sitting up at the podium because a six-year-old's a first grader, right? I mean, a first grader who can light a match, who could pop the top off of something. I mean, a lot of times those are parents who are giving drugs to their kids, quite honestly, but some of them are just doing it themselves. So that's our sickest population. The group that's incarcerated for the disease of addiction, they're particularly sick. My point is that the exposure can happen very, very young. And I'm going to make what I think is my most extreme statement of tonight, which is that if you do not expose your brain to an addictive substance over the age of 23 or 24, you'll never develop an addiction. Addiction is a developmental pediatric disease. It starts while your brain is developing. And if I were a kid, or if my own kids had a very strong genetic predisposition, both parents had addiction, one or both sets of grandparents did, this is the kid, and my own kids I take care of in my practice. I'm a family doctor, so I take care of generations. I know where grandmas are, I know where grandpas are, I know that dad's actually locked up for heroin, I know what mom's addiction history is, and I will sit with that kid in my office and say, love, you know that you have a very strong genetic risk of addiction in your family. We've talked about this before. You are the kid whose first exposure to an addictive substance really needs to be 21, 22, 23, or 24. You are the kid who really cannot go to the Friday night after prom party and drink at the age of 15 or 17. This is the only thing that you get to control, is your age of first use. And I'm not saying that my stern talk or my loving talk at that minute necessarily is going to change, but they at least have the knowledge to make a better choice. And if you can postpone that use, when you look at the data looking at genetics that then lays on top of exposure, you can almost cancel out the genetic risk if your exposure happens after the age of 21 or 22. So this is specifically alcohol, starting drinking at the age of 15, and drinking here is defined as 2 drinks a week. Not 1 week like this, but weeks upon weeks, 2 alcoholic beverages a week, started at the age of 15. 40% of those kids go on to be alcoholics. If you wait until you're 21, 7% go on to be alcoholics, which is well below what national averages are of alcohol use disorder. My point being that this is the thing our kids can influence, age of first use. I mean, I never say to my own kids or my kids in my office, oh, you can start smoking cigarettes at 22. I'm cool on that. Like, I'm never cool on tobacco. I just think it's a horrible drug. But I've said to my own kids, like, look, I know you are 17 or 18. I know you want to go to this party. I am telling you that your risk exposing your brain to alcohol is too high. And I'm asking you to go to that party and keep an eye out for everybody else there, but you need to be very conscious of the fact that you're putting your brain in harm's way. So I have a kid in college now, and you know, he came to me when he was 17 and was going to his first party. He said, I'm going to a party, and I said, uh-huh. And he said, there's going to be alcohol there. First of all, I'm thinking to myself, he's going to somebody's house, which means parents are supplying the alcohol, which there's nothing that makes me angrier than that, partly because one, it's illegal, but two, there's this sense that parents have that they're protecting their kids by putting it under their own roof, but they've done very good studies looking at kids who drink with their parents at home, and it actually creates in this brain this very strong association between alcohol and safety and love and warmth and family, which is not what the developing brain should have an association with. Alcohol, as everybody I think will acknowledge, can be a very damaging drug, particularly in the developing brain. So the sense that parents are doing right by their kids, right? They're not doing right by their kids. It's not okay ever as an adult to supply alcohol to your kid. And you know, this kid went off to college. My kid went off to college, and his first night, he has been at his very expensive school for all of 6 hours. Went to his first party, and he is hauling home these kids who are passed out drunk. Like, doesn't even know the kid's name. Bringing them back to their dorm room, putting them into the don't vomit into your lung position, calling the RA and calling the health center. And he has this role. Kids know to call his room. He's there, he's studying, or maybe he's at the party, but he has this role that I actually think many of our students could have at a party, which is sort of keeping tabs on people. Sort of watching that girl who seems like she may be drinking too much and making sure she's not getting hauled up those back stairs, right? We know that every assault that happens under the influence, right? Whether it's the influence of the assailant or the influence of the victim. Often both people are under the influence of something, and if they could go back in time and have their brains on right, they wouldn't have gotten hauled up those stairs, and they were much less likely to assault, right? There's two major victims in that rule. So the role that every student in this room could play is sort of that knight in shining armor, or knight Tess in shining armor, who's going to help protect other kids from making terrible decisions. Because bad things happen, as we all know, in college, right? 25 to 30% of women are assaulted. That's a big number. Okay, so the number one drug of abuse in this country, illicit drug, is marijuana. I don't think that should surprise anybody. I don't know what you think your marijuana use is locally. Does anybody think it's low? Right, it's incredibly high, is what I will say. I don't know anything about actually Sandwich's statistics. I know what Massachusetts statistics look like, and I know what the country statistics look like. It is so far off the chart on this graph that there's no space for it on this chart. It goes off the screen. So this is the thing. Our students make awesome decisions about nicotine and about alcohol. The rates, and I'm going to show you a graph that shows this, the rates of alcohol use and paper cigarette use has never been lower. In fact, we've had a statistically significant drop every year for years on end. 5.3% of high school seniors smoke cigarettes. That is a major public health victory. Our students make awesome decisions on nicotine. In fact, if you ask the average teenager, do you smoke cigarettes? They're like, that's disgusting. They're horrified by it. The problem is that as cigarettes have gone down, marijuana's gone up. And why is that? Because there is a decreased sense of risk with marijuana. So what does the average teenager say about marijuana? And I would love the teenagers to answer this question. What do you guys think about marijuana? Well, the adults can answer it too if you want to. Yeah.
People say it's like not bad.
It's not bad, it's safe, it's fine, right, totally fine. Yeah.
My patients, a lot of them say, when you ask them if they smoke, they say, not cigarettes. And they all act like marijuana is okay, but tobacco is this horrible thing.
Right. So they'll sort of, in comparison to tobacco, it's much safer and in fact likely benign. Okay, what else do you hear? Yeah. It's medical. It actually cures diseases. It could be written as a prescription. It's good for you. It's beneficial. Will cure cancer. Will fix all seizures, right? I'm being facetious, so everything I'm about to do is being facetious. Okay, other things? Yeah.
Dead brain cells?
Say that again?
Does it deaden brain cells?
Well, so most teenagers don't tell me about any brain effect that it has, but we're going to dive in on marijuana specifically. Yep.
This is not what I would say now,
Yep.
what kids would say, but when I was growing up, it was always known as the gateway drug.
Right, so we of a generation would say it was in the 80s and into the 90s was called a gateway drug. And in fact, there's a very strong anti-gateway drug push out there saying, in fact, the average teenager will say, it is absolutely clear this is not a gateway drug, it does not lead to other problems. So I'm going to just do the couple other ones you always hear. It's better than alcohol. I hear that one all the time. It's not addictive. I hear that one all the time. And no one ever died from marijuana. So that I think we've covered the average under 30-year-old's perception of marijuana in our society, okay? Because I have never known a generational chasm like I know now on this one drug. So let's talk about brain development again. I said between 12 and 22 or 23, really huge things happen. There's 3 specific things that happen. The first one is synaptic refinement. So that's sort of an artistic representation of the brain on the left. The point being that we have tens of billions of synapses in our brain, and nobody needs that many. In fact, not clipping them back, not pruning them back, actually leads to a really unhealthy brain. When you do brain scans on people with really bad schizophrenia or psychosis, they have way too many synapses going way too many places. There's a lot of disorganization. So one of the most important things that happens during this time is you are pruning back unnecessary synapses in the brain. There are times during that 10-year period of adolescence, the stuff that's in this school and in the middle school and in the high school, where you are losing 30,000 synapses a minute. That is amazing, it's exciting, it's wonderful. It's why our teenagers are pushing the limits. They love sensation seeking, they love physical activity. We want them to be doing this because their brains are trying to sort out, what do I need to keep and what do I need to get rid of? This is the decade that they get to do that. But you can imagine, right, being exposed to a substance or a behavior or a trauma during this time, maybe during that period of 3 months where you're losing 30,000 synapses a minute and having the wrong stuff get pruned away. You can imagine all of this stuff getting disrupted quite badly. So the second of 3 things that happen during this time is we myelinate or we insulate pathways to make them more efficient. So if we're not insulating or myelinating things, those pathways disappear because they're not the most efficient path to take. So that's the second thing that happens. And then the final thing that happens is we lay down receptors. And the receptors that we lay down during this 10 years is we lay down dopamine receptors in the cortex, and we lay down a very important receptor called anandamide, which nobody's ever heard of. It is our natural endocannabinoid. It is the natural thing in our brain that actually looks just like cannabinoid in marijuana, except it exists already. It's already there. And the problem with marijuana is that the THC, that euphoria part of marijuana, it's one of hundreds of cannabinoids in marijuana, replaces the one in our brain. And here I have a young brain sitting there building all of these places where you want these receptors to lay. Everything pink here is a nice normal anandamide receptor. And instead the THC comes in and it knocks out your natural one. The job of anandamide is to prune and to myelinate. That is its job. And we have just disrupted it by laying down this incredibly potent THC. So instead of having a scalpel in that decade of making really good, precise decisions about pathways and pruning, we have what we consider to be a sledgehammer. So we are going to have, unless the Attorney General in an amicus brief filed with the court 2 weeks ago, we are going to have whether we want to legalize marijuana on our ballot in a very specific way in November. That is like 5 or 6 months from now. And I feel like the average person in the state does not understand any of the impact that marijuana has on a developing brain. So one of our problems in this country is we don't study marijuana, and why is that?
Federally prohibited substance.
Because of the way the national government does, it's on a special list.
Exactly, right? Because it's a Schedule I drug. It's illegal. That's the answer. Is you can't study Schedule I drugs easily. You can, but it's incredibly complicated. And with marijuana, there's one federally grown marijuana plot in Mississippi, and it's been there since the early 1970s. And it grows some strain of marijuana that is like nothing anybody ever uses. I guarantee you that, because its THC is very, very low. So we do not study it well in this country because you will not get federal funding to do it, right? And so you need tens of millions of dollars to put on a good study. So most of the studies on marijuana come from other countries. The ones I'm just going to show you here quickly are New Zealand and Australia, who actually do a very good job researching marijuana. And this is good study that was following people over a period of 30 years, looking at exposure during adolescence, starting at the age of 13, 14, or 15, and then follows them for 30 years till they're 35 or 40. It asks the question, is everybody look exactly the same? Does it matter at all? And what it showed was an 8-point drop in IQ and a very significant, there's a measure for this, which is language is not familiar to me, but a very significant drop in sense of I met my goals, I met my purpose in life, I am where I'm meant to be. And instead, the group that had brain exposure to marijuana during adolescence was a group that had large dissatisfaction, had a sense of I didn't get to be the full person I meant to be. When people who didn't have that adolescent exposure felt like, yeah, I'm married, I have a job, I have a career, I'm doing what I want to do. There's a really significant drop in who graduate from high school and the scores getting into university. So my point in saying this is that this data is based on the old marijuana. So everybody knows that in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, marijuana had a THC percent of between 1 and 2.5%. That's the people who've used marijuana in this room of a certain age, that's the marijuana you used, okay? Every one of those studies I just showed you is based on marijuana less than 2.5%. Massachusetts' definition of marijuana is THC less than 2.5%. You will not find that plant grown anywhere in this country, or unless you're in Mississippi at the federal field. Marijuana today has been genetically modified to grow incredibly intense THC levels. So all marijuana out there is sitting between 9% and 16% at a minimum. That's the stuff that's growing in not my personal backyard, but in my county. I come from a very rural agricultural county. So as you can see, marijuana, THC, the euphoric brain-altering stuff is incredibly intense. And then for those people who are over the age of 30 in the room, this is what marijuana looks like. Now, if I put that in front of you, most people in this room wouldn't be able to recognize that and you wouldn't know how to use it. But the average person under 25 or 30 knows what everything up here is. They know the THC percent and they know how to make it and use it. But if I put a big fat joint in front of the average 18-year-old, they wouldn't know what that is, okay? The products here are a way that marijuana gets manufactured, either in your own home kitchen, quite dangerous, or in a manufacturing plant. So that piece of thing that looks like amber glass is called shatter. That thing in the bottom middle is sometimes called earwax. It's a dab product. Those have 70% THC in them. Cannabinoid oil, which is the stuff that's in that syringe, that's something you would use to make a food product, that is as high as 100% THC. So I take a plant that is now grown more strong and I intensify it by manufacturing it in different ways. So that is a lot of THC. So who's been to Colorado in the last couple, 3 years? Nobody. It's funny how few people go to Colorado. But anyway, Colorado, as we all know, awesome state, great outdoor state. They legalized medical marijuana in 2010, and as everybody knows, recreational marijuana in 2014. So marijuana dispensaries are everywhere in Colorado. They outnumber both like McDonald's and Starbucks put together. It is very hard to go anywhere without seeing them. They are candy stores. And in these stores are gummy bears and gummy worms and lollipops and every single imaginable candy bar, Kit Kat, Nestle Crunch that have slightly altered names that are playing on the name of marijuana or pot. So we have pot tarts and honey and other things. In that, what you don't know is the serving size. And I'm going to get to this question, but the serving size on those candy bars are 12 servings. 12 servings. So the last time you shared a Kit Kat with 11 friends was when? Never, right? But there's a tremendous amount of THC. In the range, when you look at the backs of those, the range of THC within that product, they'll say is between 70 and 100%. So what were you going to say?
Yes, it's a well-taken point. So this was a big problem in Colorado in the first 6 months of legalization, but they've rewritten the bill that now edibles can no longer resemble commercially available non-THC laced products. So things like Pop-Tart, like Nutella, that's no longer allowed in Colorado. That's no longer allowed. They don't allow it in Washington State. They're outlawing it in Vermont as well.
So that's good, but the police chiefs and the governors just were out there 4 months ago, and I saw what they brought back, and it looked just like this. So it may be that it's changing next year or 2 years from now, but I'm telling you, what is available in the stores right now looks just like this. And it's good, because Colorado learned from their mistake, which is, wow, we can't put out products like this that are intended towards children, because that That urban legend of nobody ever dies from marijuana, well, welcome to Colorado, where we've had 3 deaths from marijuana. Children, little children, under the age of 10. Not because of respiratory depression. Marijuana doesn't stop you from breathing. It just caused whole system collapse. So I had the head of the emergency room for Colorado give a lecture last year, just going over every detail of what they're seeing in the emergency rooms in Colorado. And as we have an ER doctor here, I can tell you it is horrifying what they see in the ERs. Just frank psychosis, because you can't pack this stuff unless you're a police chief, because they brought it back to Massachusetts. But you can't go to Colorado, buy this stuff, get on a plane, and come back to Massachusetts. So the night before your plane takes off, you're in your room with this stuff, and you're just going to eat it all, right? So people, there's a very routine process. You show up at the airport, you are high as a kite, you are stoned, you can barely like get through the airport. They have a whole system, like everybody knows what you look like. They just have an ambulance run that's running from Denver International to the local ERs, where they basically like dry you out because you are way too sick to get on anybody's airplane. They don't want you on those airplanes. So there are whole bays of ERs whose entire job is to just like shut you down. Like, you lose your airfare, obviously, nobody's getting that reimbursed. So the highest rate of marijuana use in the entire country is in the great city of Denver, a new interpretation of what it means to be the mile-high city. This is what I think all of us would predict. You guys do not have a medical marijuana dispensary anywhere nearby, is that fair to say? You have a medical marijuana dispensary in Mashpee?
No, I'm asking.
Oh.
It passed, it hasn't been built yet.
It hasn't been built yet. There's many that are slated, right? But they have had a very slow rollout because they're very highly regulated. So I think we're up to 4 that actually are brick and mortar and exist in the state. One in Salem, there's one in Northampton, there's one in Brookline. I don't know where the 4th is. So the one closest to me is Northampton. I did a tour of it. And it's a pretty high-end place. It's sort of a mixture of an Apple store and like a boutique hotel bar. It's expensive. They had really beautiful handcrafted chocolate edibles. Like, it was a little over the top. I can tell you, I take care of poor people. There's no way they could have afforded anything in that store. But what we see is that medical marijuana is in the local high school, everywhere. So you have to be 21 to walk in there. You need an ID. You need your certificate to get your medical marijuana. But once you walk out of that place, you can bring it anywhere you want. You could sell it to any kid. So we're seeing it all over the high school, which is a terrible outcome. Because I'm going to say something pretty strongly, which is I don't care if an adult uses marijuana. As long as they don't get behind the wheel of a car, they're not putting the lug nuts on my tire, and they're not operating on me. I don't really care. Because in an adult brain, I actually don't think it's any worse than alcohol. But where I really care is in the adolescent brain. And I can tell you that when you look statistically at who is using marijuana, it is people under the age of 25. And when the industry is trying to figure out where they're going to sell it, they are counting on hooking brains under the age of 25. That is part of their mission, that is part of their plan. I have no interest in my kids using marijuana. Again, when they get to have a fully developed brain, they can use it as long as they don't do anything that's going to put other people in harm's way. So this is an awesome article in New England Journal, I think it was last year, by Sharon Levy at Children's Hospital, and it just talks about what happens when things get industrialized. So this talked about tobacco. So tobacco is a native North American plant, right? The native people of this country were using tobacco for rituals. They weren't smoking the equivalent of 2 packs a day. It was actually a fairly infrequently used drug. So less than 1% of people in this country in the year 1900 used nicotine. But by 1950, 50% of us were smoking cigarettes. And why is that? Because of the industry. The industry took over. They did 2 things. They grew a more potent tobacco plant, and then they intensified the form that it would get into your body, right? And then they created these paper cigarettes with 500 different chemicals in it to really hook you. You think that's not what we're already seeing with marijuana? Of course that's what we're seeing with marijuana. So here I have data showing an 8-point drop in IQ with a THC of 2.5%. I can tell you, IQs are not improving with a THC of 16% or 70%. I have no interest in losing a generation of people who start using marijuana early, because those people are going to be doing my knee replacements and taking care of me in a nursing home. And I just think that people have got to think very carefully before they say, this is a good thing, it's beneficial. I think if we can guarantee no kid's going to get this, I'm in, but that's not the way it works. So I know it felt like I just went off topic, but the marijuana thing is a giant train headed our way. Okay, so again, nicotine has never, ever, ever been lower, but you know what's high? Is e-cigarettes. Do you guys find e-cigarettes vaped products in the high school? Yes, right? And what do you think is in those?
Marijuana.
Yeah, God knows what's in them, quite honestly. So why do I say God knows what's in them? It's because they are not regulated. They come from India and China, and we have no idea. So 36% of high school seniors are using an e-cigarette product, and they'll say, I'm just using the flavorings, bubblegum, watermelon flavor, but who knows what's in it, because nobody inspects them. Until Obama just 2 weeks ago, he said, you know what, we're going to start regulating this industry, but that's going to take 2 years to roll out. These things are targeted towards kids. You think the average adult trying to quit cigarettes is buying bubblegum, watermelon flavor anything? Of course they're not. That's insane. These are targeted to get our kids hooked on nicotine. So when they do studies on these flavors, there's nicotine in it, even though the kids don't know that, right? So then I have created a generation who are now addicted to nicotine, which was the whole point of our big success of getting rid of tobacco. So we took many steps forward, we've taken a little step back. I am going to say, though, that alcohol rates, again, have never been lower, and that's a real testimony to the fact that our students are making good choices on alcohol. Okay, so let's talk about us and alcohol. I'm talking to the parents in the room. 1/3 of us in this country drink zero, nothing. 1/3 of us drink just a little bit, social drinkers, light social drinkers, a couple drinks a month maybe at a party, but the final 1/3 of us drink all the rest of the alcohol in the country, and in fact, 10% of us drink on average 10 drinks a day. 10% of us drink 10 drinks a day. That's a lot of alcohol. And way more than 10% showing up in an ER or in a hospital are drinking 10 drinks a day. And people are always like, that's not possible, 10 drinks a day. But I just want to remind you what a drink is. So the easy stuff is beer. A beer is a beer. 12 ounces of beer is one drink. 1.5 ounces of hard alcohol counts as a drink. So the last time you mixed yourself a drink, a margarita, a mojito, I don't know how carefully you measured your alcohol going in there. I guarantee you put more than 1.5 ounces. So I take care of a lot of bartenders, and they'll say to me, I had a cocktail. Tell me the amount of alcohol in your cocktail. And it's often 3 drinks, okay? A glass of wine is 5 ounces. So the average woman that walks into my office, I will say, tell me about your relationship with alcohol. And she will say to me, I have a couple glasses at night. And I say, glasses of what? Oh, wine. And I'm like, okay, so tell me about your wine glasses at home. How much are you pouring? I have no idea. Okay, well, I know what your wine glasses look like because I'm a woman too. Women have, and men, giant goblets at home. Goblets, right? Like mason jars on a stem at home. And they go home after a hard, long day at work. They've been working all day. They've been up since 5. I'm going to get rid of the they. I'm going to say me, right? Been up since 5, doing laundry, walking the dog, cleaning up last night's mess, go to work all day, come home, nobody's emptied the breakfast dishes, nobody walked the dog. Did they start even their homework? And I've got 8 more hours of work ahead of me. Women are shifting to alcohol use and alcohol abuse as a generation more than we have ever seen in history. In wine and the marketing of wine towards women and women going out drinking with their friends has been a massive cultural shift. The average woman goes home and glug, 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 glug wine. The average class is holding 15 to 20 ounces of wine. So you get yourself very easy to 6 or 8 alcoholic beverages, even though you just told me I have a couple glasses at night. And what I say to these women is, look, love, I need you just to acknowledge what you're drinking. I need you to put 5 ounces in your glass and look at that, where that is, where that level is, and know that that's one drink. I'm not shaming and blaming you on how much you're drinking, but acknowledge that you're actually drinking 6 beverages a night. Acknowledge it. And then we'll figure out what we really want to do with that information and why it is you're drinking. Because the message as a parent that we need to send to our kids is if we've had a hard day at work, we're feeling overwhelmed, walking in the door, flipping off the top of a beer bottle, or like glugging the wine is one of the worst messages you could send, right? All you're doing is saying, I'm stressed out, I'm overwhelmed, I'm going to drink. But what if every one of us walked in the door and said, man, I've had a hard day. Will you go for a walk with me? I hate my job. I think I want to quit. I need to go sit down in the other room and go listen to a 15-minute meditation app. Anybody want to join me? What if that was the message our kids saw us do, which is actually managing our stress, our anxiety, our overwhelming lives with some healthy behavior, not just checking out? The statistics on alcoholism, it's always been a man's disease. It's been a 9-to-1 ratio between men and women for millennia. But in the last 15 years, it's now shifted. It's now 6-to-3, men to women. 15 years it took us to get there. That is not a positive thing. Okay, so I did 2 of the 3. I did genetics And I did early use, and then I ranted about alcohol and marijuana, because I had to. But now we're going to come back and talk about something that is going to be possibly a little uncomfortable, but also I think we have to acknowledge a truth about this, which is that a history of childhood trauma puts you at tremendous risk of addiction. And I want to tell you about the study that showed this. So in 2007, a very important study called the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Event Study, came out. It's a Kaiser study, so really well run. Tons of people were involved in it. San Diego County, mainly white actually, mainly middle class. And it asked 10 questions about what might have happened to you as an adult under the age of 18. They had a specific reason they were doing this, which I won't go into, but I'm going to show you what some of the questions were. I'm going to read them because they're tiny. I'm not going to read every one, but just to give you a sense. Did a parent or another adult in the household often or very often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you? Act in a way that made you feel afraid that you might be hurt? Did a parent or another adult in the household often or very often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you, or ever hit you so hard that you had marks? Were you ever sexually abused? Did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you, or thought you were important or special, or that your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other? Did you often or very often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, had no one to protect you? Or that your parents were too drunk or too high to take you to the doctor if you were sick? Were your parents separated or divorced? Somebody in your family incarcerated? Did you have major mental health problems in your family? So it's 10 questions, yes or no. It is not a survey we give to kids. It's not something we give to people under the age of 18.
No.
I lost my I kicked it. Am I on now? Is that good now?
Yeah.
Did you guys hear where I was though? Because the sound here is pretty good. Okay. So it's not a survey we give to people under the age of 18. It's intended for adults to reflect upon their childhood. And what they did not anticipate, because they were looking for one specific question, is that having an ACE score, a adverse childhood event score, greater than 3, which 52% of us in this country have, puts you at high risk for diabetes. Oh, I said that wrong. Puts you at high risk for heart attack, early death, emphysema, broken bones, more than 50 sexual partners, HIV. I mean, like every chronic disease out there. This is one of the biggest risk factors for, with the exception of stroke and diabetes. Those are the 2 diseases out there that are not influenced for some reason by this. Having a high ACE score puts you at particular risk for 2 things. Living with chronic pain, the disease of chronic unremitting pain. And secondly, developing an addiction. And this may seem like, what the heck is she talking about? Why did we end up at this point? But it acknowledges a truth that is often hidden in the closet for many people out there. And part of me doing this is to sort of acknowledge that a lot of people had childhoods that were really very painful and tragic and harmful. And if you live with a lot of psychological pain, it makes a lot of sense that you would want to numb it and check out. And I want us to acknowledge this because this is an individual who's at such high risk of developing an addiction that this is the kind of person you want to get help for them early so that this is not a trajectory they want to go down. You want to acknowledge, look, you might want to numb out and check out from this pain, but instead, let's get you really good trauma-informed treatment. Let's get you to go to trauma yoga. Let's do EMDR. Let's get the best quality treatment out there for you, whether you're an adult or you're a child. So if you don't know anything about the ACE study, it is worth one late night Googling it because there's a ton of research, there's a ton of money being spent studying this because it is such a huge predictor for having a bad, unhealthy life. And you may think that's crazy, like why would a traumatic childhood lead to emphysema? But I want to just remind you about what it's like. You know, your body is intended to have a spike of adrenaline, a spike of cortisol when you have to flee, right? You're being chased by a bear. And it's 1,000 years ago, you get this great cortisol spike and you run like mad and you cower in place and you're safe and you go down to normal. But when you're a kid living in fear, when you're worried that something bad is going to happen to you or your baby sister, you're on with a high cortisol level in your brain 24 hours a day, every day of the year. And that toxic stress in the brain has a huge influence on the development of every organ in your body. So if there's one thing that we can do as a society is to help protect our kids and keep our kids safe and to acknowledge when other kids are in trouble. And I say this to the teachers and the school nurses and the doctors and the counselors in this room. All of us have worked with kids. This is really important stuff. We can't play it down. So the final message I'm going to say on sort of the communication we might have to our kids is that you need to talk early and talk often. A kindergartner should know never to touch a pill that they find, ever. They should get an adult. That is a 5-year-old conversation. But really, by the time you're 10, 11, or 12, you should have talked to your kids about where they are at higher risk, possibly because of genetics. You can also acknowledge what has happened in your own family. Just having divorced parents is pretty darn traumatic. I mean, I score a 1 on an ACE score. My parents were divorced. I was fine, but I tell you, it was pretty darn traumatic for my life as a child. Acknowledging that and getting your kids the right kind of treatment that they need. And then the final thing is delaying the use of addictive substances. Like delay. I say to my own kids, I know you're going to drink alcohol someday, but please delay it as long as you can. Okay, so this is the message, take-home message that for the students in the room, you know, hear me or don't hear me, but for the parents in the room, this is the conversation we need to be having. Okay, so again, I said this already, alcohol use has never been lower in the history of time, and this goes back to the mid-1990s, but boy, I've seen charts that go back to the 70s. Boy, we were doing terrible amounts of drugs in the 70s, that's what I would have said. So alcohol is way down, nicotine is way down, all the other drugs are totally flat, mainly due to marijuana. So I know that everybody came here maybe today thinking we were going to just talk about opiates, and I haven't said much about opiates, have I? And that's for several reasons. One is that in general, our high school students are not using a lot of opiates. They're not. Statistically speaking, the rates are very low, 1 or 2%. But having said that, we all know the damage that opiates and opiate use disorder and addiction to opiates has caused to our own families and our own communities. I know the Cape gets a lot of grief because the Cape has had more than its fair share, but I've looked at the county by county statistics. You guys have more by a small amount, but the truth is, Franklin County, which is where I'm from, huge rates. Berkshire County, which is next door to me, huge rates. You show me a county that is not heavily affected by this, right? It's a question of how active your community is in addressing it. Like, I look at Essex County, which is, I don't know, Essex County is Gloucester and Lawrence, and I've been up there talking. Some of those towns, Newburyport, I tell you, they got a big problem, but they're doing the best they can to address it, but they have no doctors managing addiction anywhere. Essex County has like 0 treatment providers. There's some in Lawrence, but that's it. You know, the Cape at least has some treatment providers going on here, which gives testimony. You guys have, in this room, I have select people. I have people on the school board. The fact that you're even having a public forum. We have the substance abuse group here. Like, you guys are acknowledging, wow, we have a problem. We want to do something about it. That is 20 steps ahead of a lot of places. So congrats for that one. For me, and Carolyn knows this about me, but I'm a family doctor who specialized in women's health. I did prenatal care and deliveries and babies, like that's what I did forever. And then I left Boston, moved out to where I grew up in rural Western Massachusetts. And when I arrived, I was like, wow, lots of addiction, who's taking care of that? And they were like, nobody. And I thought, oh man, really? So I just began doing the work because I happened to like the work and I knew how to do it. So every morning I wake up and I pick up the newspaper and I walk the dog. And the first thing I do every morning is I read the obituaries. Not because I have low dopamine and I'm morbid, but because I'm a family doctor who takes care of old people who are dying. I need to know who died last night. I need to make phone calls. I need to fill out a death certificate. So every morning the obituaries are my ritual. And one morning in December 2011, I read the obituary of the young woman on the left in the red jacket. And it said, Ashley Sims, age 21, died of a heroin overdose at home. And I thought, oh my God, Ashley died. I know her grandmothers. And I called them and I said, I'm so sad about Ashley. I'm so grateful you told the truth. Because for several years, I've been reading young people dying unexpectedly at home in the obituaries thinking, there's only 2 ways you die unexpectedly at home, right? You die because you committed suicide or because you overdosed. And unless it says give money to Dana-Farber or the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, these are not young people dying of cancer. And we all know this because you read these obituaries, right? These are people you went to high school with. These are your family members. And, you know, when you look at the statistics of the percent of people dying, it is 80 people a day in this country are dying of overdose by opiates. It is an enormous tragedy. And, you know, I think in general it was brought to you by the American medical system. So this is a slide that just says pills are on the hook for this problem. And one of the reasons I do this work
is because I feel so personally responsible as a prescribing physician. I trained in the 1990s. I trained at a time when we were told pain is the fifth vital sign. You need to treat it. You're going to get bad reviews in the ER. Your hospital's going to get shut down. JACO's going to come in. You're not managing pain well enough. I trained at South Boston Community Health Center in the 1990s, where the OxyContin rep would feed us meals and say, you can't get addicted to OxyContin. It's totally fine. The addiction rates are less than 1%. You should give it for migraines. You should give it for knee pain. Give it to anybody you want. And by 1999, we're looking around South Boston thinking, oh my God, these kids are all addicted to this drug. We all stopped prescribing within a year, but still the industry was flooding us with, it's fine, it's safe, but it's not what we were seeing. So 1990s, a child should have and could have drawn this chart. The more you prescribed opiates, the more people are going to get addicted to opiates, the more people are going to enter into treatment for opiate use disorder. And I like this slide because it really puts it in context of public health. So public health, this covers a decade of the year 2000 to 2010. And if you, again, it's a complicated chart. The bottom part of that chart, the bar graphs that go to the left, are places where we have reduced death. And on that, the number one reduction of death in the past 15 years is with aortic aneurysms. We have reduced aortic aneurysms by 34%. Does anybody know why? Yeah.
Because we're better at recognizing and treating it.
Well, so that is a very fair answer. We're faster at, he's an ER guy. Like, he's thinking, like, scan them, get them in the operating room. So we probably do save some lives by intervening faster. But I actually went a big picture way, we reduce smoking. We reduce smoking, which is really the number one cause of having an aneurysm rupture, and we control blood pressure better. So again, public health. He and I are doctors. We like to think the work we do on a daily basis makes a huge difference, but it's really public health measures that make a huge difference in things. We reduce death by flu and pneumonia. Why is that?
Vaccines.
We vaccinate people. Exactly. Thank you for my nurses out there. We reduce death by motor vehicle accidents. Why is that?
Safety measures.
Seatbelts and safer cars. So again, public health. This is the government stepping in and saying we're making a change. That's where you reduce death. Look at all the places we increase death. There is an epidemic of Alzheimer's disease and dementia and Parkinson's and end-stage kidney disease. Is there truly an epidemic of those diseases? We are living forever and ever and ever. And when you live that long, like yesterday, I filled out a death certificate. She was 98. What really killed her? I have no idea. For the last 10 years I've seen her, she doesn't know who I am, she doesn't know where kids are, so I write down Alzheimer's disease, right? Because that is, at the end of the day, what killed her. My point being that there is not truly an epidemic, it's just none of us will ever die. Two things on this place, right? Increased rates of suicide and a 276% increase in death by opiates. This is prior to 2010. If we had a bar graph that looked at 216 back, that would probably be a 990% increase of death by opiates. And I like this graph because it puts our current problem in the context of the overall public health of our nation. And I can't think of anything that we've ever done this badly in medicine, ever. And I think about it all the time. I'm obsessed thinking about it. I think about Tuskegee experiments, which is syphilis with African Americans in the South. That was bad, but it didn't affect tens of thousands of people. Lobotomies were bad. The eugenics movement in the beginning part of the 1900s, that was bad, right? Bad medicine. But this, in terms of a nation, it is hard for me to find anything that we've done this wrong. And the flip side of that is that even though people like me did a bad job, although I actually was a pretty good prescriber, we're not actually rising to the occasion and actually trying to fix it. When you look at the average group of physicians out there, most of them are not dealing with the addiction problem. Most of them don't want them in their waiting room. Only 2% of us in this country have our Suboxone licenses. 2% of us. Do you think that's going to treat the problem out there? It's appalling. So you should see me give this talk, the equivalent talk of this to doctors. I get really rageful because I'm pissed at my own colleagues that they have not risen to the occasion of a problem that we created. So that top map of the United States is the year 1999. So this is me in South Boston. And what you see here, bright red on this map, is places where people are dying of drug overdose. And on that top map, what do you see? You see Appalachia starts to light up. In northern New Mexico, there's one Indian Health Service region of New Mexico that is known for generations of having an addiction problem. It's sort of a little bit infamous in the public health community. 5 years go by and you get to that middle map and you start to see the red spread, right? Appalachia's like Appalachia moving to the Rust Belt. Florida starts to light up, the Southwest starts to light up, and you start to see New England go orange. And then 5 more years or 4 more years pass and you get to 2009, which is the bottom map. Can you imagine how red we are now? I mean, just think 2010 to now, think of the difference there. So you guys know this, but I-95 was called Oxy Highway, right? The whole time that I was in training, we all knew that Oxycontin was coming from Florida. And there were as many as 1,300 pain pill mills in Florida, meaning that no insurance accepted, cash business. Some strip malls would have more than one. They would actually have 2 pain clinics. We would send busloads of people down. There would be tour operators from Ohio and Kentucky and Maine saying, look, you get 5 free nights stay in Florida. We'll pay for all your meals. Your job is to go to 1 or 2 pill clinics a day. You don't even have to limp. You don't need a cane. Just go in and tell them you have migraines. And you would leave with both a bag full of 300 pills and a script. You get back on your bus. You give your pills and scripts to your tour operator. They go back to Kentucky. They sell it on the street. You got a free vacation, right? No harm done. A lot of harm done. So in 2010, the federal government looked at the state of Florida and said, if you cannot get your pill problem and these clinics under control, we're cutting off federal funding. You will have no school funds, you will have no highway funds, we'll close down your airports. Florida perked up at that moment and said, wow, that seems like we've got to do something about our pill clinics.
I'm sorry, what year was that?
2010, 2009, 2010. So this is a slide from 2011, but this is them having shut down the clinics, just hauling in the stuff. So 2010 is this very magic time where there's a major shift in the availability of pills on the East Coast. And they incarcerated 37 doctors because these people are American licensed, American trained medical doctors who are running these pain clinics, but they weren't doctors, they were drug dealers. They were absolute drug dealers. They were making between $5 and $50 million a year. I saw the DEA agent speak who was one of the guys who shut down this stuff, and he was showing us pictures of their houses, their 10-car garages, their cars that, cost $250,000. Like, until recently, I drove a car that my bike cost more than my car, right? I was driving like a 1985 Honda Civic that I've had since high school. Like, the notion that these guys were criminals, I hope they stay in jail forever is what I would say. So here I have a problem now, though, because I have people all over the eastern seaboard addicted to opiates, and I just cut off most of my supply. So what are you left with?
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Where were these pain clinics getting the OxyContin? Was it the black market? Was it directly from manufacturers?
It was from the manufacturer. So the laws of Florida, and actually most of the states in the southeast, are as follows, which is that you can both write a prescription and dispense a drug in your office. I can't do that. You can't do that in Massachusetts at a clinic.
Some injectables you can, right?
Some injectables you can, but if I were to dispense a drug, you are regulated much more intensely. The DEA will come in and inspect to make sure that your system is safe and you have safe and locked down. States like Florida, this was not a legal drug. 90% of the oxycodone that was sold in this country was in the state of Florida and then dispensed straight up I-95. So it was all being dispensed there totally legitimately. As many pharmacies went down as pain clinics. And in fact, some of the reasons that places like Walgreens and CVS, particularly Walgreens, is doing such a good job is the lawsuit against Walgreens in Florida was huge. I mean, the federal government came down very hard on them because there was a lot of collusion going on, right? Like, people are coming in for prescriptions for 600 pills and a pharmacist was filling that. That would never happen, ever now, right? But for 10 years in Florida, it did. Nobody was checking it. So you got no more pills, and you got a bunch of people addicted. You think that the Mexican cartels weren't waiting for this? They're incredibly smart. They had mowed up their marijuana fields like in 2007. Right? We're growing so much marijuana in this country, you don't need Mexican marijuana. It's all like being grown in Humboldt County in Florida, and in California and in my county. But so they had planted the poppies. It used to be the case that opium came from Afghanistan, but that hasn't been true for a long time. It's all coming straight from Mexico. They have an incredibly smart system of distribution. It's very high tech. It's very clean cut. It is not violent. In 5 minutes, we can have as much heroin as you want in this lobby by texting the right number. It is going to be a very hard system to shut down because it's nice, it's smart. These are very polite young people selling drugs to our kids. So the more purity there was, which is the top graph, the cheaper the drug is. I don't know what it goes for at the Cape. My guess is it's pretty cheap here because you're close to some major sources. But where I am, it's running $3.50 to $4 a bag. So that's like $40 a bundle. I don't know what it is. Anybody know what it's running here? 3? Somebody say 3 or 4 maybe? You guys are close to some pretty big distribution sites. And also it's coming in from the water here, right? From my perspective, it all comes up from New Jersey, up I-91 and I-95. But for you, from New Jersey, it hit the water and come in through Providence and other places. I mean, I'm not the DEA, I just hang out with those guys sometimes. Okay, so let's look at the country. The country, if you ask the average emergency medical responder, what's your #1 drug problem? The dark green areas, the answer is opiates or heroin, okay? But what's interesting to me about this math, this is recent data, is that most of the country, a lot of the country doesn't say that. In fact, the Southeast specifically says, we don't have a heroin problem, we're good. Does anybody know why that is? I already gave that answer away. So the answer is this, which is that those states still have pill mills. Those dark purple states are states where on average, there's 1 to 1.5 opiate prescription per person in that state. So those dark purple states, tons of opiates available. You got a knee problem, migraine problem, go down to Kentucky, go down to Mississippi. They'll take care of you good, right? That is a massive problem that some of these states have not actually shifted the way that they're prescribing. So when you, I'm going to go back because I know you're going to take a picture and you're going to get a copy of the slides, whoever wants them, you're going to be distributed. But when you look at the country and ask the question, where is heroin the problem? The red states are heroin. So look at us, there we are, right? Then there's Illinois. And then just go back and reflect upon the fact that when the CDC guidelines have come out, the Food and Drug Administration have endorsed the CDC guidelines. The federal government is very much getting into the mix of controlling how it is that doctors and advanced practice clinicians prescribe opiates. Those purple states are going to have their pipeline shut down in the next 3 to 5 years. And every purple state up there is going to become a red state. And if you think, and I'm going to be a deep New Englander that I am, I'm a Bay State kind of gal, but if you think Mississippi and Arkansas and Alabama are doing forums at night and training their doctors to be addiction doctors and opening up methadone clinics and getting Suboxone out there and building treatment beds left and right, they're not doing that. This is a tsunami that is about to hit the Southeast, and I predict there will be tens of thousands of people dying of death by heroin in the Southeast in the next 5 to 6 years. They have no idea what's about to hit them. They should have an idea because they should have watched us go through this. Everybody knows that we have not made a dent in the problem in Massachusetts yet. Right, the statistics that came out for the first quarter of 2016 look as bad as they ever have. They don't look worse. It looks plateaued, but it looks still really bad in terms of death. And that's largely due to the fentanyl that's available now, that's coming in from China, that gets shipped in. It's all added in New Jersey and then gets shipped up here. And on the street, you can't tell what has fentanyl in it. It all looks the same. So the reason why opiates are a particular risk for our teenagers is the following, and that is that our teenagers can get injured. So if you're an athlete, if you're a football player, you're a hockey player, you can get a femur fracture, right? You can have an appendectomy, get your appendix out. You can get your wisdom teeth out. So this is a time period while your brain is developing where you may be prescribed an opiate. That's not the way most of our teenagers start with their opiate use. They start by taking it from their medicine cabinet at home or getting it from a friend. And so this is yesterday's news, like 3 years ago news, but if you have a prescription for an opiate or another controlled substance, whether it's Valium or Xanax or a stimulant like Ritalin or Adderall at your house, you're not actively using it, get it the hell out of your house. Bring it to a drug take-back box tomorrow. Everybody is responsible for every drug in their house. If you are actively using those medicines, they should be under lock and key. I have all my alcohol under lock and key at my house. Once my kids hit age 13, I thought, why am I making this any easier for them than it needs to be? I already have made it clear that I don't want them drinking while their brain is under development. Why do I have any alcohol available to them in my house where they can open up a cabinet and get it? So I went to the hardware store and I bought a lock and key and I installed it. And one of my kids was like, you don't trust me? I was like, I totally trust you, my friend, but you're an adolescent and part of your job is to push the limits and explore things and try on new things for size. That's the way your brain is supposed to work. I don't want this to be one of those things. So ask yourself where your pills are at your house and where your alcohol is and other substances. And if it's not under lock and key, it should be. If it's not being actively used, it belongs in a police take-back box. Get rid of it. So when it is prescribed for the average adolescent, it is coming mostly from these sources. And so one of the things I will say as a parent is to look at whoever the prescriber is and say to them, I would like to limit the exposure that my teenager is going to have to an opiate. What can I use for pain management that's a non-opiate? Talk me through it. Tell me exactly how to dose it and how to use it. How can I use Tylenol and ibuprofen or Advil in conjunction with each other? What is my exact dose? How frequently can I use it? Have them lay it out for you. The studies that look at 1,000 milligrams of Tylenol plus 200 of ibuprofen says it works as well as 5 milligrams of oxycodone. The problem is the average person thinks Tylenol and Motrin is the same drug. That's what the average person does think. I mean, people in this room are like, but of course that's not true. But that's what people think. Or they think the average 15-year-old is going to go into kidney failure because they use ibuprofen. Highly unlikely, right? Now, I'm not anybody's doctor in the room, but I am just telling you, that is the question I ask my own prescribers who take care of my kids. What am I going to do to limit exposure to this teenage brain? If I had a kid who had a femur fracture, they snapped their thigh bone in half, I'd give them opiates because they are in terrible pain. But you know how I would do it? One, I would maximize the non-opiate stuff as much as I could, and I would be administering the drug. So if you have a kid who's injured, who's home because they got their wisdom teeth out, they need to have an adult who administers the drug, and otherwise the drug is under lock and key. Because every kid you're out there that you talk to who has now developed a problem with opiates, and if they started with pills, they will say, I was home alone, I was 17 years old with my wisdom teeth, I had some baseline anxiety and depression, I took that first pill, and I felt awesome. Right? They got the dopamine spike. They got 500 of dopamine. They felt better. They felt healthy, happier. If there was a history of trauma, they didn't feel it anymore. Like, why wouldn't they keep going back to it, right? They were home alone. They finished the entire bottle in 2 days, and then they get more. So as an adult, you're in charge of all of those medicines. The school nurses know all of this stuff. Like, we have to ensure our kids are safe. The last time that anybody had oral surgery in the room, root canal or wisdom teeth out, how many did you get?
They gave him 5 days, I don't think it's 15 pills, 3 days, 5 days.
15, 1-5, Vicodin. That's actually fairly conservative prescribing. That's not a bad number. Anybody else?
2.
You got 2.
I asked for 2.
You asked for 2.
My kids are addicts. I said that they would smell them. So I said I want to be able to sleep tonight.
Wow, okay, wow, that's awesome. But you had to ask for it, because I have to say, if you hadn't asked for it, nobody would have written for you for 2. Most often, right, the number in the average room that I hear is 30. And I don't know how much of that, even that 15 your husband used for a root canal, but for my root canal, I used 1. And when you ask the average room, so I've now asked this question because I've probably talked to, I don't know, 15,000 people. The average person after a root canal or wisdom tooth are using 0, 2, 4, or 6. I've never heard of more than 6. One day in the back of the room, some guy shouted out, I use 60, and I was like, wow, something must have gone really wrong for him. And then I said, really? He said, but I'm an addict. And I was like, awesome. Like, that makes total sense, right? So I love that you asked for 2. And I think that actually the average doctor out there is going to do what they always do, because we are the slowest group to change. So you should take control of it. You should say, look, I'm going to ask you for 6. If I'm doing terribly in 2 days, I'm going to call you. Because guess what? Somebody's on call for your practice 24/7. And it's not going to be end of the world. The truth is, I'd rather have people have a little bit less. Everybody knows that Governor Baker's legislation has a partial fill. So you can walk into any pharmacy with your prescription for 30 and say, I would like it cheap. The problem is you won't get those 28. It's not a partial fill that holds on to the other ones. They get wasted. So there are some states that those would have sat there, the other 28, and you could have gone back and get more. That's not the way our bill worked. But if you don't like what you were prescribed, ask for less at the pharmacy. That is your right, okay? So for those of us who have kids who have struggled, like, this is stuff that it would have been nice to know ahead of time. The average parent that brings their 24-year-old into me, their kid has been using heroin underneath their roof for 3 or 4 or 5 years, and they just didn't really know. Maybe they knew for a little while. But this is the stuff you might find in their room. So anything that you can roll up and snort through, roll dollar bills, a straw, inside of a broken pen. Most everybody starts by snorting. Very few people start by injecting. But most people move on. And so if you're finding anything that looks like the part of a syringe, unless you have a type 1 diabetic in your house, you should never find any parts of a syringe in your kid's room. You should also not find razor blades in your kids' room, right? Kids cut themselves because they're trying to feel differently. Like for me, knives or razor blades, a straight edge razor in my kid's room is absolute no way, that will never happen. They're not reglazing the windows at night, I know that for a fact. So I go through my kid's room, not that I clean them, not that I do their laundry, but I walk through and I look. I look for anything that feels to me like worrisome. There should be no bottles in my kid's room. There should be no Motrin, there should be no Benadryl. I don't trust that my kids know how to dose it appropriately. I don't want them taking a pill for every pain. Like, you know what, your calf hurts? Let me teach you some stretches. I've got a foam roller. We'll go roll that calf out. You do not need pills for every problem. And this is, welcome to America. We have the pill for every problem kind of attitude in this country. So when I have that 24-year-old in the room and I look at the parents and I say, you need to go home and you need to, I'm going to get to that. Let me just finish this thought before I forget it. But you need to go home and you need to empty out the room. Empty it out. I need every stick of furniture out of that room. I need it down to bare walls and a floor, and clean it out. And they come back a week later and like, what'd you find? And they find a lot of the stuff. What they really find are those bags. They will find thousands of those little baggies, tiny, either made out of wax or like little tiny baggies. And unless your kid is a beater or something, why are they having little baggies in their room? There's no reason for little baggies in their room. Because when they are struggling later, they will look for those baggies and they will be scraping the dust out, right? So let's get their rooms cleaned out. So the other things here, burnt foil. Like, what do you use why is there burnt foil in your house, ever, right? If you've burnt foil in your kid's room or in your house, it's because somebody's cooking down the drug, whether it could be burnt on a gum wrapper. If you're making baked potatoes in your fire pit in the backyard, there's a time you can have burnt foil in your house. I can't think of another time. So tell me what you were going to ask.
Yeah, I get, what, third row down all the way to the right, what is that?
Those are filters, those little orange things?
Oh, they are cigarette?
Yeah, so, well, those are filters. So anything you could filter a drug through. So there's a lot of things you'll use for filters. You can buy actually good quality filters, which again, why would you fight filters in your kids' room? But the most common thing is cotton balls or Q-tips. So any kind of cottony material that you use to filter a drug. So parents will say they were going through a box of Q-tips every 2 weeks or bags of cotton balls. So for families who struggle with addiction, tell me if I'm wrong about that. I don't know the last time you bought cotton balls or Q-tips. Infrequently at my house, like really, like once every 2 years. It's like, I don't buy that stuff. But when your kid is asking, can you go get me a gallon of vinegar and a bag of cotton balls? There's something concerning going on. I know they're not washing the windows with that vinegar. I know how my own kids are. It's not happening at my house. So my point is that I will be the kind of parent who likely has a kid using heroin under her roof. I would like to know on month 3 and not on year 3, okay? Because bad things are going to happen. This is not a disease that has to do with socioeconomic status or skin color. It can happen to any one of us. And I go through their rooms, not because I'm a terrible nosy parent, because I'm trying to keep them safe. So one of my kids actually had knives in his room. He whittles, he does other things. I was like, I don't want those knives in your room. It completely freaks me out. I don't want any sharp object in your room, I'm sorry. And no straws. I know that seems ridiculous. I know you're drinking chocolate milk with your straw. I don't want straws in your room, I'm sorry. They're bad for the environment, get them out. So for me, this sort of thing is something as a parent I would look out for. Are there any parents who would say anything up here, add to it? Yeah.
I noticed you don't have anything for huffing.
Huffing. Yeah, so the #1 drug of abuse in middle school, 7th and 8th grade, is any volatile gas that could be huffed. So that is a great point. This is really focused on opiates and not on the other things. But anything that has a strong odor, you know, I'm not going to lie, I don't have those things under lock and key in my house, but that's the kind of thing, boy, you should keep track of it. If you are somebody that has a lot of like volatile things because you do a lot of shop work or you work with a lot of chemicals, I think probably you should have that under lock and key. It's a really good point because that is really bad for the brain. Very few 10th graders are huffing anymore, but 7th and 8th graders, that's what they like. They like that feel of loss of control with a huffed product. So that's a great point that nobody's ever mentioned before. Yeah?
Something seemingly innocent, bottles of water.
So tell me more about that.
Bottles of water, maybe only about 2 inches missing out of the top. 2, 3, 4 bottles of water in bedroom, only 2 inches missing out of the top. They use the clean water to fill the needle.
Ah,
And the rest of the bottle is so unimportant, it just sits there and they go get a new one.
Right, interesting. Okay, so that's one that's not on the slide, but that's a great one. Okay, I didn't know that one.
I wondered why
You were finding all these
not
bottles of water
drinking
everywhere.
The whole bottle, you're
Why aren't you
wasting
drinking the
them.
whole bottle?
And it was a tough lesson.
Right, that's a great example. Okay, So if you don't carry Narcan, but there's somebody who you love, who you're worried about, you should carry Narcan. If you are an emergency medical person, if you're a nurse and everybody knows if there's a problem, they're going to be looking at you, you should carry Narcan. It's more likely someone's going to collapse in front of you with an opiate overdose in a school or in another public setting. And unless they're an old fat guy, then they're probably having a heart attack. Although everybody knows, you call 911, you start rescue breathing, and you give Narcan. So I carry Narcan in my purse because I live in a little town, and if there's a problem, I'm the one they look at. So anybody can get Narcan, right? You don't need a prescription. You can go to any Walgreens in the state without a prescription and get it, and your insurance will cover it. That is true for many CVS's too. First of all, do we have Walgreens here? In Mashpee? Do we have CVS's here too? Has anybody walked into the CVS looking for Narcan? Has anybody walked into Walgreens?
We did a secret shop of a lot of the pharmacies on the Cape, and we had mixed results with pharmacists who were incredibly supportive and understood the standing order, and the pharmacists who weren't as educated and were stigmatizing, and then other pharmacists who weren't as educated on it but were very supportive, and
So do you have any advice for this room about where they might go to get both good advice and not have the question asked, which is what some people do, is who's it for? What's this for?
Right.
Like, none of your darn business, my friend.
The Hyannis one was very, Hyannis CVS?
Hyannis North Street?
Yeah.
Was
Hyannis
thumbs
North
up?
Street. Yep, so, thumbs up.
Thumbs up, okay, so
Yep.
the Hyannis CVS was particularly
Yes.
good. It's actually very personality dependent, it shouldn't be,
Right.
but it is, has to do with who the pharmacist is.
That's a hotbed. North Street's like the epicenter of the opiate epidemic in Hyannis, basically.
So your point is that there happens to be a big use area, so it's a
Yeah.
place where maybe they go.
And
So
I think the people from our local aid support group who distribute Narcan have also spoken with them.
great, so that's wonderful. In your ER, is there a handout saying if you need Narcan, this is where you get it?
No.
So that'd be a lovely thing for the substance abuse group to put together, like get the information about where it's available and
Right.
that you
And
don't need a prescription.
The Cape Cod healthcare pharmacies now, they also carry Narcan too, so that's also available.
Good. In that, again, Mass Health, it's like $3.65 if you have Mass Health. I have Blue Cross, it costs me $10.
So that's what I'm saying. So how about people that have no insurance? How do they go get Narcan?
Well, so there's a distribution through the Department of Public Health, and I don't know who has that contract on the Cape.
Aid support group at Cape Cod.
Okay, the aid support group, so it's free through the state, but you have to go to one of their trainings, is the way it normally works?
Right, and they'll also come and do training here. Also Learn to Cope. They also do trainings if you go to them. So both of those are options for us on the Cape.
So Learn to Cope is a parent or a family support group for families struggling with an opiate, and they will have Narcan available to you for free. To pay cash for it, the newer version, the atomized nasal spray is $40. So if you've got $40, you can buy it, I guess. But $40 can be a lot of money for somebody who's poor. Yeah.
I went to one of the training programs. It's the aid support group in Hyannis.
Yep.
And they're more than willing to give anybody who wants it free Narcan.
Yep.
If you have a family member that you think may be at risk or maybe has had a drug habit and you're worried about them overdosing, go see Donna Mello at the aid support group, and she'll set you up and she'll give you whatever you need.
That's awesome. That's a great thing. But you can imagine there's people who wouldn't want to do it. But so again, most of the big pharmacies have a standing order, but I love that that's a great resource.
If you have a niece or a nephew, it doesn't, go talk to Donna Mello.
Yeah. Even if you have a mother who's on a lot of opiates for chronic pain and she's like drinking and nodding off, I tell you, she's at high risk of overdose. And then add in her little Xanax she takes at night with her cocktail, done. Like, she's at high risk of overdose. That's somebody who you need to have Narcan for. Yeah.
I just want to say that aid support group partnering with the Born Substance Abuse Coalition, they are having naloxone training on, I believe it's May 26th. I don't know the time, but I can send that. So if you Google right now for the Born Substance Use Coalition, I can't pull it up right now, but it's May 26th.
I have that information from Donna Beers.
Okay.
I can send that out.
I think it's the 24th.
Oh, is it 24th? Okay.
So that's this Thursday. So Get Naloxone Now is a website, and it just tells you how to recognize somebody who's overdosing, how to administer the drug. I have this playing at a loop at the jail. Like when I have visitors coming to the jail, they're the ones who are going to be managing the kids who come back out, high risk of relapse. So we have this running so they can understand how to administer. It's not hard. It used to be a lot harder because it was the intramuscular version that is in a syringe, and you had to like screw something off and screw something on. Unless you're a nurse, it was overwhelming. But now that the nasal spray is extremely easy to use, and there's an auto injector that talks to you. Yeah.
So for your correctional facility, do you have a specific, those guys or women have a specific program when they're released? They would have to go, or do they just go right back out to the community? For those of them who have, have an issue with oxygen.
Yeah, we do a tremendous amount of work at our correctional facility to do reentry planning. The likelihood of relapse after leaving jail is incredibly high. So first of all, we do treatment in the jail. So if you come into us and you're on Suboxone, we continue your treatment at Suboxone. We're like the only jail in the entire country who does that. We, at the time, 8 weeks before you leave us, we make a plan, 1,000 different ways to help you prevent relapse. Most of the time, you really can't go home again. We need to find you a new place to live, and we need to get you hooked into whether it's methadone or Suboxone, or we give you often a Vivitrol shot at the jail. So we do all that work. My experience with naltrexone, the Vivitrol, is it's not working great for people with an opiate use disorder. People want it to be great. They want it to be a non-opiate fix, but my statistics are pretty dismal. The company sells itself a lot to jails, but I'm all about getting people not to die and to have a life that doesn't involve reincarceration. So I will do whatever it takes that will work to keep them away from those drugs and get their lives back on track. These are books that are awesome reads. If you haven't read any of these, many of you in the room are nodding your heads, but if you liked sort of any part of this talk, if you just want to learn more about addiction, that In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts is one of the best written, most beautiful books about addiction and brain disease and trauma and what it does to the brain. And then if you like the trauma stuff, if you are interested in understanding a little bit more about what toxic stress does to the brain, that book called The Body Keeps the Score. This is a good thing to take an iPhone smart picture of. That is the best book on trauma I've ever read in my life. He's a Boston trauma doctor. He's at BU. The Trauma Institute is at in Brookline. I don't have, again, a personal strong history of trauma. I turn to that book routinely, and I use it in my patients all the time. The Body Keeps the Score. The book on Chasing the Scream came out in 2015. It's about how failed drug policy in this country and Western world has been, like disaster, like locking people up for their disease of addiction does not make them any better. And we're going to talk about, and I'm going to finish up on that one thought. And then Dreamland is about how the drug got here, starting in 2006 and 2007. You read it?
I'm reading it. It's confusing because it keeps going back.
It does a lot of time.
It's a long book too, so it goes back, but it's really interesting.
It reminded me that cutting down, like us saying we're just going to stop the heroin coming, that's not an approach that's likely to work. This is a very smart, high-tech distribution
Don't forget, Trump said he's going to build a wall, and he said...
You're right. The wall will stop it all. The wall will fix all problems. So I do want to say about dopamine and how to rebuild dopamine, because I said I would say that. So dopamine receptors, dopamine production, dopamine reuptakes get better. They do. They take a long time to get better. And that being a month sober or 3 months sober off opiates is just a tiny, tiny drop. Like at 3 months, you might just be able to take a deep breath and get your head above water. The relapse rate prior to 12 months is incredibly high. It's like 85%. But if you can get yourself to 2 years of sobriety, 3 years of sobriety, the likelihood of relapse goes down to 14%. And I've been doing actually addiction work now for 15 years, and what I find is that a year and a half and 2 years, people will say to me, I am finally truly better. My life is back on track. Because what rebuilds dopamine? Having relationships with other human beings that are healthy, reestablishing relationships with all the people in your life that you really ticked off and that you abandoned or that you actually took advantage of. Falling in love rebuilds dopamine. Taking care of your kids again rebuilds dopamine. Taking care of pets or animals, growing things in your backyard, having a job, giving back to community and society, doing payback for time. Like all of that makes you a better, more functional person and rebuilds dopamine to normal levels. Locking people up in a jail cell for a year and a half not only does not rebuild dopamine, it is actually damaging, right? People are not better when they come back out. They're at high risk of relapse and death. These people are your kids and your nieces and nephews, and they're moving right next door again. It would be really awesome if they got better. Sadly, some of our best treatment facilities in the state are jails right now, right? I mean, there are some good functioning jail systems out there that are doing high-end treatment. It's just that you wish that we had better treatment that didn't involve getting incarcerated and having that on your record. So I'm a big believer in changing our criminal justice system when it comes to drug abuse. And we all have to advocate for that if you're a believer in that. and that things have got to be done differently. People need a long time of sobriety. It is hard to get sober when you go back to the same place you used to use. It's almost impossible. So I'm happy to take more questions. I know I was sort of all over the place there at the end, but what other thoughts do people have? Yeah.
Quick question. You mentioned that staying sober helps rebuild dopamine, but you advocated using Suboxone and methadone. Won't that inhibit?
It doesn't, because what we know is that, first of all, we've looked at data, both with methadone, we've had methadone since the 70s, and we've been using it for addiction treatment since the 70s, and with buprenorphine, which was approved in 2002. So we have pretty good long data on it. Because it's a stable dose, it's not spiking and crashing, people's dopamine levels, they're no longer feeling like they're sitting at a 45. The number one thing people say to me when I've started them on buprenorphine, which is the generic name for Suboxone, is they come back and they say, I feel normal again. And I'm like, I know you feel normal again, right? They are no longer having to chase back to that 85. They're sitting at an 85 or an 87, which allows them then to do all the other work that needs to happen. It allows them to show up in my office, to show up at therapy, to go to meetings, to actually get a job, to repair relationships, to work with DCF, to have visitation with your kids. It allows them to actualize all these other parts of their lives that have just fallen so far off track. And as time progresses, right, I say to all particularly my young people on Suboxone, I'm like, this is not a lifetime drug, my friend, but you don't actually get to talk to me about weaning off of it in the first 12 to 15 months. I will put up my hand and say, we will not talk about it, because the relapse rate of taking you off faster than that is incredibly high. But at 15 months, if things are going great for you, I wean you off this drug. I don't do it rapidly. It may take me a whole darn year. You're going to spend a lot more time with me, and I look forward to that. But at 2 years and 3 years, people's lives are on track. I mean, I've had hundreds and hundreds of patients on Suboxone over the years. They are police chiefs and nurses and doctors and everybody you can imagine in the community, and their lives are pretty darn great, and they actually don't use that medicine anymore. And I have people who will never get off that drug, and that's good. It's good for them, it's good for society. So let me do here and then there, yeah.
What is, I work in social services, and I hear a lot of the combination of Suboxone and Adderall. What's the effect of that?
So you hear it being utilized together and abused? Or not? Or could be both ways.
That's the feeling I get. That's
so
a combination that's
often prescribed together. Is it often prescribed together or is bought on the street together?
Prescribed.
Okay. So let's talk about ADD. So ADD is complicated. I'm a big believer that it exists. And I'm also a believer that we likely over-medicate our kids on this planet, in this country at least. Trauma in the classroom looks like this. Tremendous amount of inattention. I can't sit still. I have this really hyper response to all situations. I am out of proportion reactivity to all problems. I tend to have a lot of impulsive behavior. Trauma looks a lot like ADD. And so trying to figure out whether somebody is a child of trauma or they have ADD is a critical pathway that needs to be discerned, because drugs do not treat trauma at all. And putting a kid who's been traumatized on a stimulant is not a useful treatment. So there's one thing I'm going to say. The problem is that there's a very high overlap between addiction and ADD. And the question is, which comes first? Or is it causative at all? Is putting a 7-year-old on a stimulant, does that set them up for a lifetime potential of addiction? Or is that one of the definitions of ADD is impulsive use, right? Is I act first, I think later. Is impulsivity, which is a huge part of addiction, part of the nature of people with ADD, and consequently leads them down that pathway. So Gabor Mate, who wrote that book In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, actually spends a lot of time talking about ADD. And what I will say is that if you have a childhood diagnosis of ADD and you're a young adult with addiction, putting you back on your stimulant is one of the most important things I can do, because it decreases the impulsivity and sort of that lack of control behavior, and it allows them to get back on track. So I do not withhold a stimulant if I have a childhood diagnosis. I don't treat adults for ADD unless they have a childhood diagnosis, right? Because I'm probably great on a stimulant. Give me a stimulant. I'll stay up all night and I won't ever stop talking, right? A lot of us feel better, right? It's a performance-enhancing drug for those of us who don't have ADD. So it does not surprise me that you're seeing a lot of them together, because I think those two disease states hang together often. That's one response.
Can it be abused if people are seeking that out?
Yes,
this type of high that they get with the
absolutely.
combination.
All of it can be abused. You can crush and snort any stimulant. It feels a heck of a lot like cocaine. People with a history of drug use will abuse anything they can get their hands on. I remember being in South Boston. Ibuprofen had street value in South Boston when I was there. You could abuse anything you want. So it can go both ways. They are drugs of abuse. They are drugs that can be very well utilized to help manage the disease. So it's a complicated answer. The world of child psychiatry on this issue is all over the map. There's a huge amount of uncertainty and ambivalence about which comes first. Does ADD create addiction sometimes? Yes, it could. Does us using medicine create addiction? I don't know. I hope not, but it could, right? We just don't know. Yes?
There are some situations where Suboxone, as I see it, can be more, I think it is the person, where is the person's commitment? It's only as good as the individual that's taking it, depending on where their commitment is. Are they taking it for their parents, to make their parents happy? They've taken it for themselves.
Suboxone does not work 100% of the time. It doesn't even work. It works maybe 50% of the time.
They have it in their hand, and they have to use it every day. They have to make that choice
Yes,
if
that
they're
is
going
right.
to or not.
That's right. And there's got to be a commitment to, I want to change my life. I want to get sober. I've got to go to therapy. I've got to go to meetings. I've got to meet my spiritual needs. All of those things have to fall into place.
It's a lot of work.
The drug is one component of it. But my point in even talking about the drugs is you will never hear me stand up here and say abstinence only. Go to 90 meetings in 90 days and suck it up. I have never worked in the industry of medicine and been in a field where there's more my way or the highway, ever. Because a lot of people who do addiction medicine are people in recovery. And the attitude is, well, I got sober, this is the way I got sober, so that's the way you got to get sober too. And if I said that to all my patients, like, I run 30 miles a week, why aren't you running 30 miles a week, right? You don't do that, right? You do where the evidence points things work. These drugs are not perfect. None of them are perfect. And you have to come at people in a variety of ways. I will tell you, going to a 5-day detox, getting the drug yanked out of your system and going to the street, the relapse rate with that is 97% from what I can tell. It is a useless process of going into detox unless what you acknowledge is, hi, I'm here for my first step of treatment, and then I'm going to my second step of treatment, and then I'm going to my third and my fourth step, which involves long-term sober living, right, which is something we do not pay for well. Yeah.
The 30-day treatment program is the relapse rate. Recidivism rate is not much better.
It is not much better. 30 days is, again, no time. It is a drop in the bucket. And you've got to spend, every minute of 30 days should be about where are you really going? Where am I getting your next 6 months and then the next 6 months after that?
2 years.
Yeah. Right.
And the psychosocial aspects of what creates a young person to develop a craving or an addictive drug problem is so hard to change in the kid's brain, especially in the 13 to 18-year-olds.
Totally agree.
And it makes you cry. I work with kids in treatment, and the environmental background of a family. A lot of these kids are born with drug problems. They will never be able to get past that handicap, but there's better ways and more creative ways, and a lot of research going on, and it's all good. But most of the kids, I mean, I don't know if the statistics for a fact, but I would guess that 99.9% of the people in this country who have drug problems that are creating terrible family breakdowns and just really just wreaking havoc in their lives will just have the hardest time because there just aren't enough resources.
I think everybody in the room would agree with you. Not enough resources. And again, under the age of 18, boy, you're just trying to keep them alive until they get to 25. It's so much easier to deal with a fully developed brain. Those kids do better. But when they're under the age of 22, I look at them internally and I think, it is going to be a long road. The meds don't work as well. Nothing works. If it were my own kid, I'd pack them up, I'd move them to some place where they had long-term structured sober living for 1.5 years or 2 years. But find me that place, show me that place, and show me that it gets paid for. It doesn't. Let me take one more question or two more, because I've got to actually drive back to Western Mass tonight.
My question is, you know, we see all these people, they go into a 5-day detox, and Governor Baker's talked about, you know, forcing people into detox, which doesn't work. What I see is all these people come out, they end up back in my ER, relapse, because there's no plan in place once they get out of that 5-day detox. What are we doing to fix that? Because that's really where the problem is.
Because the notion of yanking the drug out of the brain, I think, is one of the worst notions. Everybody should get, I mean, so one of the things that Carolyn didn't say is I'm actually now the medical director of an opening detox center as of next week, which is not a job I wanted, but they didn't have anybody to do it. And I said, I'm not running a detox, I don't believe in detox, I think it's dangerous. What we're doing instead is we're creating pathways of saying, look, my friend, you are going to be with us for the next 30 days, and then we're going to transition you for 6 months, but we're going to put you on methadone, we're going to put you on Suboxone, we're going to put you on Vivitrol, and we're going to hold you tight. We're not pulling the drug out of your brain. We're just not going to do it, and we're going to do a warm handoff to a community provider.
I'm confused. You said Vivitrol and methadone?
No, I said or methadone. So these are just different pathways. And so one of the good studies that came out of Yale, JAMA, June 2015, was starting Suboxone in an emergency room setting. Yale New Haven had been doing it since 2010. 7-day supply with a warm handoff to a community provider. And at the end of 30 days, 82% of those individuals were still in treatment. And at the end of 30 days, 5% of people who got nothing in the ER were in treatment. So 95% relapse rate. So is 80% at 30 days good? It's better than 5%. The question for me is, are they getting their lives back on track? Are they still with us at 6 months? Are they still with us at 12 months? The study didn't go out that far. So I argue with ER doctors all the time. Why don't you have your Suboxone license? Why don't you start this program? What are you doing to actually prevent these people from coming back and forth to your ER? Get them the treatment then. I don't need beds, right? I need more treatment providers. You know how many methadone spots there are in the state? Methadone has a pretty good track record. It's not a drug I personally would want to take, but it works better than any of the other ones. 60% success rate if you use methadone. How many methadone spots do you guys have available? Tons of them? Easy to get a methadone spot?
It's more accessible on the Cape than other places.
Oh, lucky you. I got an 8-week wait in Western Mass. I mean, that's a long wait, and that's nobody's gonna be like 8 week. That's a long wait. So you guys have more methadone here? Good for you. That's a good thing. So there's one question here and then one back over there. So let me do this one, that one, yeah?
Sure, not a question, just a clarification. We double checked that naloxone training, which of course is free, is on Tuesday, May 24th at 6 p.m. at Upper Cape Tech.
Everybody heard that? This Tuesday, the 24th. Okay, yeah.
I just think this was such a great talk and so informative, and the people that really need to be seeing this are in the high schools and 7th and 8th grade. This would be, do you do a lot of high school talks or
We
7th
try.
and 8th grade?
We try. I mean, they all remain aware of it.
They all
Well, yeah, so you guys worked really hard to invite people. It's hard to come to a night meeting. So we've talked about putting together sort of a YouTube video equivalent of this. That would be a little less like intense and bring it down a few notches. We think it could be very easily done in a high school. I have a full-time job. I have like 4 full-time jobs and I have kids. So people actually often ask me to come speak to high school students. One, I'm terrified. But I can never do it. I work full-time. So I just saw patients all day and I drove out here and I just can't figure out how to do it and still support my family. So, but I agree with you.
I can see that they would relate to you. I just feel like you
Yeah, I relate to
get the message
kids.
across.
There's a YouTube video of this, which I think, I showed it to my kids, and it wasn't over anybody's head. It's not, I mean, was this over your head? There may have been a handful of things you didn't get, but in general, I watched you. You did not fall asleep. You were totally attentive. And, I mean, how old are you?
I'm 12.
You're 12, okay. Good for you. I'm totally impressed that you're here and that you brought him. I love that. And then in the back, there were some other kids too, the exhausted lacrosse players. But I think that any 12 and above could handle this talk. And so YouTube, my name. I think it should pop right up. I'm wearing a pink shirt, and it's almost this exact talk, except I don't do the marijuana piece. I added the marijuana piece because I went to a high school, and the high school principal said, "We do not have any marijuana here." And I was like, and then he argued with me. And he started.
That was probably here.
It wasn't here, it was somewhere else, but he started yelling at me, and I'm like, I am so mad. So I stayed up almost all night, and I did all the marijuana slides, and I put them in just because I was so mad at him.
I wish you had added into the online because that made
such an.
This may be
We
making
need
its
to
way
do
from
just
Judge
a
TV.
talk on
Online.
marijuana. There just needs to be, let's talk about marijuana and what it does to the kids, yeah.
Is it okay, then if you share your slides, like I would definitely use some of your slides.
I want everybody to take these slides and deliver this talk, any component, just take the marijuana slides. And you know what I'm gonna send is, there's another great set of marijuana slides that comes out of Hatfield or Hadley. I will send them to you and you distribute them to anybody you want. You can cut and paste these slides, you can say, you can take them all, I don't care what you do. The fewer talks I have to give, the better for me. So take them.
Well, we actually have taped this, so I'm really hoping that we can utilize this for health classrooms and maybe for parents as well. If we start, rolling out our expert trainings
Yeah.
for parents, so this will be a great.
And if it's taped, the health teacher can stop and just say, we're gonna spend the next 3 classes just talking about marijuana. And think of the work, you guys are substance abuse people, aren't you? Yeah. Think about the work that you guys do on marijuana now, right? I mean, you do some work? Oh, quite a bit of work, right?
Yeah. We have 2 issue briefs coming out, so we work for the Regional Substance Abuse Council, so one of the things that we've been doing is sort of educating the community on the ballot initiative in particular, and on marijuana policy. So we're actually issuing 2 issue briefs that we've been doing. One focuses on the initiative process and what actually the ballot says and what the legislature's role and responsibility is as far as regulating marijuana in the state. The second one will be specifically on marijuana impacts on youth, so youth rates, risks of perception and harm, the teen brain science, and also sort of a normative discussion about normalization of behavior.
So are you going to be doing some talks on this subject?
The Regional Substance Abuse Council our meeting on June 2nd will focus on marijuana policy and the ballot initiative in Massachusetts.
Because we got to get the word out, my friends, because this thing's going to pass in the state. Right now, the statistics look like it's 1-to-1. Like it used to be like 70-30 in favor, but now it was like 47-47. What were you going to say, though?
There is, you talked about South Hadley.
Yes.
South Hadley,
Yeah.
they have a program called Think Again. There's also Be Smarter Massachusetts.
That's the top. Think Again. That's right. Yeah.
And there's Be Smarter Massachusetts on Facebook if you want to learn more about marijuana and the potential for the November ballot question. They still need 10,792 signatures by June 22nd.
For what? What do they need signatures
To get it on the ballot. They still need 10,792 new signatures, people that have not signed. So if you see them out and about, don't sign. But it's still not officially on the ballot yet without those 10,792.
Good. Well, thanks for saying that. Will you send those links to Carolyn? Do you mind? Just because those are the links I'm talking about. That South Hadley one is really good. Okay, guys, you've been great. Thank you for coming out tonight.